Hi everyone, welcome back to the Hobby Shack, or welcome if this is your first video. It's our second, we're excited. So we're back again this week with our next Pokemon. So that's going to be our Charmanders. Ooh, are we gonna focus? Focus. Yeah, there we go. So Charmander isn't a planter, but he is a little tea light holder. So we're gonna turn this into this. Charmander is a little bit more involved than Bulbasaur was last week. You do need quite a few more things, so let's get started. Okay, you will need to start with something to paint. Now, our Charmanders are made out of concrete and quite solid, so they are great for candle holders. With Charmander, you are going to get 1 pot of sealant. The sealant isn't 100% necessary because Charmander doesn't get wet, but we do include it just because it does add a really nice shine to your Charmander once you're all finished painting and get him all nice and glossy. All right, let's move him off to the side. To start, you are going to need some kind of orange color. Now, this is a custom mix color that we make here in the studio. You can get a pre-mixed orange. I haven't been able to find one that I really like for Charmander, but if you can find one, let me know in the comments below. Our orange is a mix of a lot of this Cadmium yellow light hue with a small dollop of primary red and then just a teeny tiny smidgen of titanium white. Just to sort of tone it down a little bit. The titanium white is optional. I like to put it in just to get a little bit more of that Charmander 90s vibe as opposed to like super bright orange. And it's good to have these colors because you will need them for the tail. The tail is a mix of the Cadmium yellow light and the primary red. So if you already have these colors to make the orange, it works out well. You will also need a brown. This is a burnt umber. This is going to be the base for the rock. Optionally, you can add some bright yellow green and raw sienna. These are literally just accent colors to make that sort of texture and moss look on the rock afterwards. You don't need to use it, but we like to add that little bit of flair afterwards. If you don't have it, don't worry too much. For Charmander's eyes, you can either paint it on using some black. This is Ivory black, but any black pigment will work just fine. Or you can use one of these really handy Faber-Castell India ink pens to draw on the eyes, which I actually found out is much easier, and I will be doing this from now on. But if you don't have one of these, a black paint works just fine with a small detailed brush. For brushes, I just use one sort of large flat brush. This I use for most of the base coats for the orange and the brown. And a sort of smaller brush just for little details. I also use a tinier brush. I don't know if this is gonna focus on it. This is just a small angle brush. I usually use this just for the tail details. If you aren't gonna use a pen and you plan on painting your Charmander's eyes, this is the paintbrush I was using. It's so tiny. I don't even know if you're gonna be able to see it on the camera, but I definitely liked using this guy when I was painting the eyes instead of using the pen. Last but not least, a makeup sponge. This is just a cheap one from the dollar store, nothing fancy. You only need this if you plan on using the accent colors for the rock. If you don't plan on texturizing your rock, then you don't need the makeup sponge. We just use this to do the stippling effect to create that sense of texture. And that is everything that we're gonna need for Charmander, so let's get started. I like starting with the orange for Charmander. Here's the first coat. So I'm gonna let this dry and then I'm gonna come back and we'll do another coat. All right, he has had some time to dry. Let's do coat number 2. And hopefully he's gonna look a little bit less like he has mange and more like he's an adorable Pokemon. right, coat number 2. I'll be back in a bit for number 3 and maybe number 4.
Later.
All right, and time for coat number 3, 4, something like that. Let's let him completely dry and we'll go from there. So I will see you all in a bit.
The next morning.
So we have our last coat for orange finished for our Charmander. Gonna take our burnt umber, take our nice big brush, and you do want to make sure that your surface is clean because you don't want Charmander to pick up any like paint or dirt or any dust or anything like that. And we're just going to nicely paint the bottom in a good solid coat of burnt umber. And while I'm doing this part, I'm actually gonna paint a little bit up on to the ridges and just get sort of a coat started there. And I don't wanna paint too crazy high up because I don't want to worry about getting too close to Charmander with this big brush and then getting brown on his lovely orange self. So you just wanna be careful. We're gonna let this dry. I did a nice solid coat on the bottom, so I don't think I'm gonna have to do a second coat there. So when we come back, we're gonna flip it over and do the other side of the rock.
A few moments later.
Okay, so our Charmander's bottom has had a good time to dry. And now we are going to paint the top of the rock. Get a little bit more of this burnt umber. I like to use a smaller brush to do this part just because it's easier for me to get into all of the little nook and crannies. You might have to do 2 coats depending on how transparent your paint is. So let's get started. And don't forget, you want to be careful here at the tail because Charmander actually has a little flame curl right there. You want to make sure you get brown around it, but not actually on his little tail curl. Okay, so we're gonna let him dry and I can show you how to do all of the funky designs. Okay, so I came back, put another coat of the burnt umber onto our Charmander. It is now pretty dry, it's dry. And we're gonna do the next part where we need our little makeup-y sponge. You can use pretty much any dense sponge you have. And what I like to do is I like to sort of texturize the sponge before I go. So I sort of rip off these little pieces just to give the top of the sponge a little bit of texture. Okay, so I have a little bit of raw sienna and a little bit of the bright yellow green, and you're just gonna blop a little bit. Actually, what I just learned is if you wet the makeup sponge a little bit, it actually makes this process a little bit easier. And you should do that first. Don't be like me. Wet the makeup sponge first and then put your paint on. I like to start on the back and just sort of dab around and get a good amount of this raw sienna all over. Don't worry if you get on Charmander. I'm gonna show you how to take that off. And that's it for the brown. So now we take the green and we do the same thing. I find with the green you do want to be a little bit more sparing. The sienna nicely dissolves into the burnt umber, but the green does stay quite vibrant. You really don't need a ton. It is gonna dry down a little bit darker. It looks pretty bright right now, but that's okay. And To clean up all of the little extra bits on Charmander, again, we just take our Q-tip and we just go around gently with a little bit of water. That's all that's in the cup, is just a tiny bit of water. No rubbing alcohol, nail polish remover, don't use any of that stuff. You just put this paint on so it'll come right off. All right, and that's it for the rock. The rock is done. Okay, so because this is super light, it's already pretty dry. You can let it dry longer if you want. I just want to get the next little bit done, but it's totally up to you if you want to let it dry a little bit longer. So this is Cadmium yellow light hue. So it's the same yellow that we used to make the Charmander color. And as I'm sure you saw how transparent the orange was once the two colors were mixed, you can probably guess how transparent just the yellow on its own is. So I like to do this in a pretty thick layer, and I like to just sort of paint in these stripes here for Charmander. Okay, that's it for the yellow. And we have the primary red, again, the same red that we used for making Charmander. So don't have to get different colors. If you want to make a deeper red for Charmander's tail, go for it. Sometimes I use this red mixed with a little bit of the burnt umber just to give it a little bit of depth to it. If you want to paint the inside of the flame, go for it. I don't. I just leave it orange. And last but not least, painting the eyes. Now you can either grab some black paint and paint using a teeny tiny brush. That's how I've been doing it, but I actually just tried to make the eyes with this fine liner and I actually really liked it. It's nice, it's black, it's waterproof, so I'm gonna try it. And that's it. Almost done.
The next morning.
Our Charmander is all dry and ready to go. So what I like to do is I like to actually seal up the bottom first. So we grab our pot of sealer and carefully open it. Don't want any spills. If you are doing this with a youngin', we do recommend that an adult helps out, especially with this part. Technically this stuff is non-toxic, but you wouldn't really want a youngin' to be playing around too much with it. It's the same stuff that they use to seal concrete driveways, which is why it's really, really good for our concrete planters and keeping them nice and protected from any sort of water. But at the same time, that also means that it does say non-toxic on the bottle, but I don't know how much I trust that. It's driveway sealant. So just be careful. If you do get it on your skin, it does wash off with water while it's wet. Once it's dry though, I have had it on my skin for a few days and it just sort of has to flake off. So be careful. You want to make sure that you don't get it on anything. If you do get it on something that you don't want to be sealed, make sure you wash it immediately with soap and water. Same with your brush. It won't kill your brush unless you accidentally leave the sealant on your brush. I have totally done that. And I do like to seal up a little bit onto the rock, but I do want to be careful that I don't have any drips. We are going to leave him upside down to dry, and once he's dry, we're going to coat the bottom side. I'm just gonna carefully close this up so it doesn't dry out, and go wash my paintbrush with some cool soapy water. All right, and we are back. So it has been a full day. I let him dry completely. I did do a second coat after about an hour, just to give the bottom a nice good seal. I like to have an extra layer on the bottom. It's not needed, but you never know. that's it. There is Charmander, all done. So I am going to let this dry. I'll probably come back and do a second quick coat just because I'm retentive. And that's it. We'll put a little candle and away he goes. And he's gonna be ready. And there we have it. Charmander is all finished. He is having a wonderful snooze with his little tea light, and he's a pretty happy camper. So I hope you guys had a great time here at the Hobby Shack, and we will see you next time.